America, the land of opportunity, the beacon of freedom. Today, these phrases ring hollow for many. Economic inequality and political polarization threaten the nation's foundation. Trust in institutions and each other has plummeted, creating fertile ground for division. Social unrest, fueled by racial injustice and economic disparities, simmers beneath the surface. Climate change is now a clear and present danger, bringing more frequent and intense natural disasters. Internationally, America's standing has diminished, its moral authority questioned. The convergence of these challenges creates a perfect storm, threatening the nation's survival. This essay will delve into the factors pushing America towards this precipice. We will explore how political polarization, economic disparities, and environmental negligence could converge to bring about the nation's downfall. The aim is not to offer a prophecy of doom, but a stark warning, a call to action. Only through honest introspection and bold action can the nation hope to avert disaster. The United States has always been a nation of diverse opinions and passionate debate. However, the current state of political polarization represents a dangerous evolution. The rise of 24/7 news cycles and partisan media outlets creates echo chambers, deepening divides. Social media amplifies extreme voices and spreads misinformation, further fueling division. This toxic polarization has poisoned the well of American governance. The result is a political system characterized by gridlock, where even the most pressing issues are held hostage to partisan warfare. From climate change to healthcare, critical issues remain unaddressed. This failure to govern effectively erodes public trust in institutions and breeds cynicism about democracy. The most insidious consequence of hyperpartisanship is the erosion of trust. Trust in government, institutions, and even each other has plummeted to alarmingly low levels. This lack of trust is a corrosive force, eating away at the very fabric of society. The constant barrage of misinformation creates an environment of suspicion and hostility, making it difficult to address the challenges facing the nation. The gap between the rich and the poor has reached levels unseen in generations. The American dream is fading for an increasing number of citizens. The top 1% control a disproportionate share of the nation's wealth, while the bottom 50% struggle. This disparity undermines the notion of a meritocracy and fuels social unrest. This widening economic chasm affects access to quality education, healthcare, and basic necessities. Education, often touted as the great equalizer, is increasingly a reflection of the socio-economic divide. Healthcare is also increasingly out of reach for many Americans. The lack of economic mobility traps individuals and families in a cycle of poverty, stifling innovation and growth. This stark economic reality has profound social and political consequences. It erodes the social contract, creating fertile ground for division and exploitation. The growing sense of economic insecurity fuels resentment and anger. Addressing this economic inequality is essential for the long-term stability and survival of American democracy. While political battles rage, a far greater threat gathers on the horizon: climate change. Extreme weather events are becoming more frequent and intense. The scientific consensus on climate change is overwhelming. Yet America is paralyzed by political gridlock and short-term thinking, hampered by powerful vested interests. The reasons for America's lackluster response to climate change are complex. Political polarization has turned a scientific issue into a partisan battleground. Short-term focus and powerful vested interests have delayed action. While the rest of the world moves forward, America risks being left behind, vulnerable to the escalating impacts of a changing climate. Section 3. The high cost of inaction. The consequences of unchecked climate change for the United States are dire. Economically, the nation faces trillions of dollars in potential damages from extreme weather events, sea level rise, and agricultural losses. Coastal cities, home to millions of Americans and trillions of dollars in infrastructure, are particularly vulnerable. As sea levels rise and storms intensify, the costs of adaptation and disaster recovery will soar. Socially, climate change threatens to exacerbate existing inequalities, disproportionately impacting the most vulnerable populations. Low-income communities, often located in areas more susceptible to flooding and extreme heat, lack the resources to adapt and recover. This could lead to mass displacement, social unrest, and increased competition for dwindling resources. Geopolitically, climate change poses significant risks to national security. As resources become scarcer and climate-related disasters displace populations, the potential for conflict and instability increases. The United States, with its global military presence and reliance on stable trade routes, is particularly vulnerable to these disruptions. The failure to address climate change is not simply an environmental issue. It is a threat multiplier, exacerbating existing economic, social, and geopolitical challenges. It is a recipe for national decline, a slow-motion catastrophe that threatens the very fabric of American society. The time for denial and delay is over. The United States must act now, with urgency and determination, to avert the worst consequences of this gathering storm. Section 1. A Society on Edge. Beneath the veneer of American exceptionalism, a deep unease festers. The nation finds itself on edge, a tinderbox of simmering tensions and unresolved grievances. Mass protests against racial injustice and police brutality, a resurgence of white nationalism, and a growing sense of alienation and anger. America has always grappled with social divisions, but the current moment feels different. The issues are complex and deeply rooted, stemming from systemic racism, economic inequality, and political polarization. These factors have been brought to a boil by a confluence of events, from the COVID-19 pandemic to the rise of social media, which spreads misinformation and hate. This societal unease reflects a deeper malaise. The American dream feels like it's slipping away. Equal opportunity rings hollow for many, facing discrimination or feeling politically disenfranchised. This discontent creates fertile ground for social unrest. When people feel unheard or marginalized, they are more likely to take to the streets and demand change. This can manifest in both peaceful protests and destructive unrest as frustration boils over into anger and violence. To understand the potential for social unrest in America, one must examine the interconnected fault lines of frustration that run through society. These fault lines are not isolated but rather interconnected, intersecting and reinforcing each other in dangerous ways. Racial injustice remains a festering wound on the American psyche. Despite decades of progress, systemic racism continues to permeate many aspects of American life, from law enforcement and the criminal justice system to education, healthcare, and housing. The killings of unarmed Black Americans by police officers, often captured on video for the world to see, have sparked outrage and protests, highlighting the deep-seated racial disparities and the urgent need for reform. Economic inequality further exacerbates these tensions. As the gap between the rich and the poor widens, so too does the sense of resentment and frustration among those struggling to make ends meet. The lack of affordable housing, stagnant wages, and rising costs of healthcare and education create a sense of economic insecurity and hopelessness, fueling anger towards a system perceived as rigged against the working class. Political polarization acts as an accelerant, fanning the flames of division. The hyper-partisan political climate, fueled by social media echo chambers and partisan news outlets, makes it increasingly difficult to have reasoned dialogue or find common ground. Instead, political opponents are demonized, compromise is seen as weakness, and the political arena becomes a battleground where winning, at any cost, is paramount. The potential consequences of unchecked social unrest in America are profound and far-reaching. At its core, widespread unrest erodes the social fabric, the shared values and sense of community that bind a nation together. When trust in institutions plummets, and people view each other with suspicion and hostility, it becomes exceedingly difficult to address societal challenges or find common ground. This erosion of trust can manifest in various ways. It can lead to decreased civic engagement, as people become disillusioned with the political process and withdraw from public life. It can also fuel polarization and extremism, as individuals gravitate towards those who share their grievances and demonize those they perceive as the enemy. In its most extreme form, unchecked social unrest can lead to violence and instability. When peaceful avenues for expressing grievances are blocked, or when individuals feel their voices are not being heard, they may resort to more drastic measures. This can manifest in riots, looting, and other forms of destructive behavior, further deepening divisions and undermining social order. The unraveling of American society is not a foregone conclusion. However, the warning signs are flashing red. Addressing the root causes of social unrest, racial injustice, economic inequality, and political polarization is not simply a matter of social justice. It is essential for the long-term health and stability of the nation. Failure to do so risks unleashing a maelstrom of discontent that could very well tear the country apart. For decades, the United States has reigned as the world's preeminent superpower, its military might unmatched, its economic engine driving global markets, its cultural influence felt in every corner of the planet. Yet, beneath the facade of unipolar dominance, cracks have begun to appear, revealing a nation struggling to reconcile its self-proclaimed role as a leader of the free world with the realities of a rapidly changing global order. America's foreign policy, often characterized by a mix of idealism and realpolitik, has left a complex and often contradictory legacy on the world stage. From its role in defeating fascism in World War II, to its interventions in Korea, Vietnam, Iraq, and Afghanistan, the nation has walked a tightrope between promoting democracy and safeguarding its strategic interests, often at a tremendous cost in blood and treasure. While America's military and economic might remain formidable, its moral authority, once a cornerstone of its global leadership, has waned. Controversial interventions, perceived double standards, and a domestic political landscape rife with division and polarization have tarnished the nation's image abroad, making it increasingly difficult to rally international support or inspire trust. This decline in global influence is not merely a matter of perception, it has real-world implications for America's standing in the world and its ability to shape global events. As the world grows increasingly multipolar, with new centers of power emerging in Asia, Europe, and elsewhere, the United States can no longer dictate terms or expect unquestioning obedience. Section 2. The Seeds of Resentment. America's foreign policy missteps, particularly its military interventions, have sown the seeds of resentment and anti-American sentiment worldwide. The wars in Iraq and Afghanistan, based on flawed intelligence, have left instability and unintended consequences. Drone strikes causing civilian casualties further fuel anti-American sentiment. Images of innocent civilians killed by drones are used as propaganda by extremists. America's economic policies are seen as perpetuating global inequality. Trade deals perceived as unfair, intellectual property laws stifling innovation, and the dominance of the US dollar contribute to resentment. This anti-American sentiment challenges US interests globally. It complicates alliances and foreign policy objectives. It also creates fertile ground for extremist groups, leading to instability. Section 3. A World in Flux. Adding to America's foreign policy woes is the reality of a rapidly changing global order. The unipolar moment that followed the collapse of the Soviet Union, with the United States standing as the sole superpower, is fading into history. New centers of power, particularly China, are rising, challenging America's dominance on multiple fronts. China's economic rise, fueled by decades of rapid growth, has propelled it to become the world's second-largest economy and a major player in global trade and finance. It is investing heavily in infrastructure projects around the world, expanding its economic and political influence, particularly in Asia, Africa, and Latin America. Militarily, China is rapidly modernizing its armed forces, closing the gap with the United States in key areas. Its growing military presence in the South China Sea, coupled with its development of advanced weapons systems, has raised concerns in Washington and among U.S. allies in the region. This shifting global landscape presents both challenges and opportunities for the United States. It can no longer rely on its past dominance to dictate terms or expect others to follow its lead. Instead, it must adapt to a more multipolar world. one where diplomacy, cooperation, and a willingness to work within international institutions will be essential to safeguarding its interests and promoting global stability. Section 1. A crossroads of crisis. The American experiment, once a beacon of hope, now stands at a crossroads of crisis. Political polarization, economic inequality, and environmental negligence threaten its survival. Social unrest and a diminished global standing add to the challenges. America must navigate these crises to secure its future. Section 2. Averting disaster. America has overcome challenges before. Averting disaster requires unity, bold change, and revitalizing democracy.